Hello and welcome to episode 27 of the Teacher's Tea Time podcast. My name is Mark and I hope you're doing well. This podcast is about, by and for anyone who has ever had anything to do with schools and education. That's probably almost everybody. Topics and content in this podcast are listener generated. They come from listeners just like yourself. We are proud to be a member of Adjacent, a design collaborative made up of educators who dream of a better world for our students and their teachers by connecting educators to their legacy. Learn more at adjacent.org. I have a mug of tea ready, so let's sit back, relax, and get on with the show. In the last episode, we wrapped up the history of education in the ancient world. We learned how fundamental the control of knowledge as a currency was to the development of ancient civilizations. So I felt it's a good time to take a breath and shift our attention back to stories about teachers and teaching. In this episode, we feature the teacher story of Jaime Kurowski, one of the designers at the Adjacent Collaborative. Hers is a cautionary tale about what the stresses of standardized testing can do to our health. Jaime is really into the doing and the teaching of writing, so I also took the opportunity to find out her insights into how we might help reluctant writers engage in the process. As the last few episodes demonstrated, writing is a key component of a knowledge currency, and as a reluctant writer myself, I found this a really fascinating conversation. So I have with me one of the designers at Adjacent, that's Jaime, and really simply, Jaime, welcome. Thank you for coming on.
Thank
you. I'd like to hear your story. I mean, you've been an educator for a while. What's your teacher story?
Yes, thank you for having me. So I started teaching in 1999, and actually I started teaching in third grade. My best friend had the works. She had even the chalk holder that you could draw the 4 lines across the chalkboard. So that was when it really sparked. And my parents are both teachers. So that I was one of those educators that was born an educator. But in 1999, after I graduated, I started in Manassas, Virginia, and in a school that was a dream come true that valued literacy and reading. And, kids would bump into each other because they had their books open and teachers were reading. It was very literacy rich. And my principal was a reader. So I was very lucky to be kind of groomed in that environment. And my principal valued professional growth and encouraged us to read professional development. And then I guess it was right around the time No Child Left Behind, not to get political or anything, but we had admin change and the SOLs started. Mm-hmm. And, or got more, I shouldn't say started, had more emphasis. Yeah. And my students I went from a literacy rich to a panic stricken, you have to pass with my new admin. And that changed everything. And my kids went from loving books and sharing to just stress. And I went to stress, and I just saw that shift, and it was sad. And I remember the first year, we all want to say we're proud of passing test scores, but when my test scores were the best they'd have ever been, I was actually the worst year of teaching ever, because that's all I focused on. And it was the worst. So moving forward through that, it just really meant I learned a lot from that. I stayed home with my kids for a couple of years and really thought about that shift and how it changed. And I said, when I go back to teaching, which I did, I don't know, about 7-8 years ago, I swore that I would not let that happen again, and that I would find a place that allowed me to go back to that literacy rich and environment. And I tried my best in, being out of education for about 7-8 years. There were big changes that happened, and there was still the emphasis on the SOLs, and I had to navigate and constantly navigate the trying to do what I loved and what I was passionate about without feeling like I was getting in trouble for not doing test prep. And even if it doesn't come from admin, it's like it's in the water, it's just a umbrella of pressure over teachers in general. But I spent, so then, the pressure continued to get to me, and I ended up actually having a big life change. This is part of my teaching story. And when I went through a divorce, it was SOL season. I was moving out of my house. My kids were little, and it was kind of traumatic. I ended up having a stroke from the stress, it was right around SOLs. And thankfully, everything was okay. But I use that as an advocacy for the mental health of teachers. And it means a lot to me to keep teachers' stress lower, and not to mention the countless teachers I know that are in, high blood pressure and anti-anxiety because of their job. So it's really important to me. So when that happened, I then brought in meditation into my life, and it changed my life. And I was able to truly, truly embrace what I really wanted to do when I went back. I truly embraced what I loved, and it was not negotiable for me. I actually changed schools again and found the place where they allowed me to be myself. At least I think they did. Again, with that nagging in the water, I should be doing this. I'm going to get in trouble. Maybe I'm spending too much time on sharing their writing, when it's oh, you should only be sharing out for 5-10 minutes. Well, we just spent 30 minutes clapping for each other, and it was magical. I'm not going to apologize for that. So, and I think sharing, I'm going on a tangent there, but the sharing of the writing that the kids did, I think made everything. It made everything, having a place to share what you write. So kind of a different topic, but that is my story.
It's such a shame your health was so badly affected by the stress that's caused. But it's true. I mean, this tension between, and it really was felt between 2000 and 2010, between teaching to a test and doing good teaching, because you couldn't do the same. I noticed that when I first came into public ed over here in the States, and other people have spoken about it, and it's still in the water there. If people listen back to the podcast we did with Chris Jacobs and about the iLab and all the great innovative work they do there, but 1 month before test season, and they have to go back and do test prep because that's what the school wants them to do, and it kind of undermines all the good work they've done up till then.
Yes.
It's such a shame. But you talk a lot about writing as being your passion, and I know many students of mine, even my undergraduate students who might be listening to this podcast, who don't like to write. I don't like to write much actually either. So what is it that we can do to help young folks enjoy writing?
I think there's a twofold answer. One is exposing the exposing some inspiration to try it, and finding what you enjoy and what you're good at, because maybe we don't need to force them to enjoy it. But what I've noticed with my reluctant writers is just through that inspiration and through sharing, and maybe they take one sentence that's kind of boring, and we allow that word in the room like that. Let's take that boring sentence and turn it upside down, or give it some juice. And maybe that one sentence that they wrote becomes something they want to share in the room, that the whole class is like, whoa, Miss K would underline that in a book. That was great. And the smile on their face is just, maybe it sparks oh, maybe I can write. Maybe I do like this. So fostering that environment where you are successful and you don't realize that you could possibly try it, right? They don't even take that chance because maybe they don't have that inspiration from someone that is passionate about it. And not every teacher is passionate about it. And I think that's okay because we all have our different strengths.
So do you think there's a misconception about writing? Because, I mean, when I think about writing, I think of it as a very lonely pursuit. It's just about me and the paper. And when we think about writing in schools too, it's, one student writing something to be assessed. And yet you've talked a lot about sharing, discussing things with peers, celebrating together, collaborating. Is that part of what you do with writing to make it less painful almost?
It's absolutely everything to me. I mean, I write for myself just to get feelings out, and that I would crumple up and throw out or burn or hide. That's different. But for creative writing, I think the voice and being heard and sharing it is essential to moving forward with it. And without, a lot of people start reading like, oh, well, I'm still working on this, or, oh, it's not very good, but no. Do you love it? Are you proud of it? Then you own it and you read it, and we are going to love it. If you love it, we're going to like it. Just the energy of it, that works. And I think that it just having a place for it, because so many kids, they're assigned things. It ends up in a Google Drive or wherever, or in a notebook or a pile. And that's that. They're like, well, why bother? Why? Nobody looks at it. Nobody hears it. Nobody cares about it. And I've seen a huge shift when I started to genuinely take the time that I wasn't allowed to take to share. It changed everything. My reluctant writers were groaning when I said, okay, it's time to stop. I'm like, excuse me? And then, can I share? Can I share? Can I go next? Can I go next? And I'm like, yes, it changed everything. And I've seen it year after year. I can't convert all of them. Some still continue to be reluctant writers, but maybe they'll at least appreciate other writers, or something good will come of it.
You also mentioned the fact that, I mean, you taught elementary school, so it always time dedicated, and there seemed to be this time crunch. And I do the same thing when I talk to folks in social studies and elementary, like that. There's no time. So, and you just ignore that and carry on. Right? So how did that work out? I mean, how was that? How did you feel comfortable enough to disregard the time that was given to you to do it because you knew it was the right thing to do?
Exactly. Part of it is probably just the shift I went through with maybe my health, and knowing that I needed to teach from really a passionate place. And that probably helped a little bit. Confidence is humongous. I mean, I don't know if, a lot of new teachers might think, well, am I supposed to do it this way, or am I doing it right? And that just takes a little bit of time. But honestly, it shouldn't be necessarily anyone above you that is not there for the good reason to have you grow, right? The students can indicate if it's successful for you, right? And being coached by someone that matters to you, that you respect, that can say, why don't you try this? And I think teachers need to have the confidence enough to own what they do in order to accept any coaching or feedback, because otherwise you're like, what do they know? There was reluctancy. So I think confidence is a huge factor in any kind of feedback. Or I also got creative with it when I taught. One year I had a really unique opportunity to teach writing and content, just writing and content, not even the reading section. And another teacher taught reading and another teacher taught math. So it was a trio. And so I merged worlds. We wrote through, we did historical fiction, and they loved it. And then with science, they wrote little mini riddles with the clouds and, using like fictional characters and what happened to them when they went outside and saw the clouds. They had to describe them in a story. And so you just kind of get creative with it. And it's not in the curriculum. So you really have to think outside the box when you want to get creative with time and how to merge both worlds.
I think it's really powerful that we have honest conversations about how stressful education and teaching can be to teachers as well as students, and that we start to acknowledge the damage it can cause, particularly when things such as standardized tests, which, are made out to be more important than they should be, are used as a way of controlling and making the stakes much higher than they need to be. And Jaime's story is an important one, so it's worth sharing. I'll also say that, if we make writing a chore, and I will admit I don't like the process of writing myself, then we do lose the ability to communicate creatively and effectively. Even today, our knowledge economy is based around communication. Look at content creators online. If they can't communicate their message, whether it be written or visual or video or audio, then that content doesn't get consumed. So I'm really glad that we have educators like Jaime who are trying to help experience some joy in themselves and some joy in the process. If you'd like to get in touch with her, you can email her at jaime@adjacent.org, and her email address will be in the show notes. Next time, Jaime will share some of her writings based on her experiences of teaching during the pandemic, and they're really, really good. But until then, that was episode 27 of the Teachers Tea Time podcast. This podcast is a proud member of Adjacent, a design collaborative made up of educators who exist to connect educators to their legacy, thus creating a better world for our students and their teachers. We create, write, talk, teach, and learn about the things that matter most in education. To find out more, point your browser to www.adjacent.org. That's www.edjacent.org. For me, it's the stories of teachers, students, and school communities that matter. As such, this podcast is only possible with the help and support of its listeners. The best thing you can do is leave positive reviews wherever you are able. If you're an iTunes or a Spotify subscriber, leaving a good review really helps our visibility. Also, please don't keep this podcast to yourself. Tell your friends to subscribe and to listen too. One thing we all have in common is that we've all been to school. So if you'd like to contribute to the pod in any way, if you've got a story to share, long, short, tragic, or comic, if you have comments to make about the podcast, or you just want to say hi, you can send an email to teachersteatimepod@gmail.com. Or alternatively, you can send emails to me directly using mark@adjacent.org. I love to hear what you have to say. If social media is your thing, you can follow me on Twitter @MarkDearcop. You can find our contact information, copies of show notes, and you can download previous episodes of the podcast at www.teachersteatimepod.com. The podcast artwork was created by Phaedra. Opening and closing music was by Brian Boyko. It's been my pleasure to be your host today. Thank you for listening.